I recently made a video about the Victoria Cross heroes from the Battle of Rorkes Drift during the Anglo-Zulu War back in 1879. And several people asked why I hadn't mentioned Colour Sergeant Frank Bourne. The short answer is that he wasn't awarded a Victoria Cross. But due to popular demand, I thought I would do some research and share his story with you nevertheless. After the initial press coverage of the Battle of Rorkes Drift in 1879, like a lot of other battles, it quickly faded from popular memory, until in 1964, the film Zulu. Suddenly, a whole new generation, or indeed generations, became fascinated by the Anglo-Zulu War and indeed the Battle of Rorkes Drift, and the courage of those defenders there. You might be one of them. I certainly am. While Zulu gave starring roles to Stanley Baker and a young Michael Caine as Lieutenants Chard and Bromhead, for many of us, the real hero of the film was Colour Sergeant Bourne, played by Nigel Green. As the tension mounts in the film with that incredible appearance of the Zulu army on the skyline, Bourne, the senior non-commissioned officer at Rorkes Drift, is a model of a Victorian soldier at his very best. With his huge frame and a rugged face that's seen countless actions, and that mutton chop moustache, Bourne strikes as the very model of a British soldier serving Queen Victoria in the 19th century. There's a moment where a young soldier asks why their tiny garrison are facing the might of the Zulus, and Bourne replies, "Because we're here, lad. Nobody else, just us." Stoic, professional, courageous, the hallmarks of a common Tommy Adkins of the British Army, rather like the men I've described in my recent Crimean War videos too. His comments litter the film, and if you're a bit of a fan, you will probably have your favourites, and I bet you can quote them line for line. So go on, write your favourite Colour Sergeant Bourne quote in the comments below. I'd love to see them. And I bet a fair few of you will have recalled his response to Lieutenant Chard near the end of the film, when he tells the commanding officer that their survival was a miracle, and Chard responds, "If it was a miracle, Colour Sergeant, then it's a short chamber Boxer Henry .45 caliber miracle." And the grizzled NCO says, "And a bayonet, sir, with some guts behind." Speaking of those bayonets, there's also a brilliant scene where he faces down a Zulu warrior with his bayonet. I mean, what Zulu warrior would want to face this steely 6'4" British redcoat with his mutton chop moustache? If anyone is the backbone of the defence of Rorkes Drift, then it's him. Or at least, so you might think if you've seen the film Zulu. And based upon that film, I can understand why so many people are baffled as to why, when 11 Victoria Crosses were handed out, Colour Sergeant Bourne wasn't one of the recipients. Frank Bourne was born in Bolcombe, Sussex in 1854, the fifth son and youngest of 8 children of James and Harriet Bourne. Despite his father being a mere labourer and having to feed 8 children, Frank had enough schooling to become a non-commissioned officer in his army career, and then to be able to help illiterate troops under his command. With a life as an agricultural labourer in rural Sussex beckoning, Frank chose to enlist in the army instead when he was 18, in 1872. Joining the 2nd Battalion of the 24th Regiment of Foot, his pay was 6 pennies a day, from which 3.5 pennies were deducted for mess and washing bills. In a radio interview in 1936, he recalled that upon enlisting, his colour sergeant placed him in A Company, which was reserved for the tallest recruits. Which, if you had the vision of his character from the film Zulu, makes obvious sense. But whilst actor Nigel Green was a broad, strapping 6'4" and had previously starred actually as Hercules in the film Jason and the Argonauts, the real-life Frank Bourne was just 5'3". As he said in his interview, his colour sergeant obviously had a sense of humour. Promotion came rapidly for young Frank Bourne. Within 3 years he was a corporal, and within another 3 years he'd been promoted to sergeant. In 1878, the 2nd Battalion, 24th Foot, had arrived in South Africa to take part in what was known as the Kaffir Wars against Xhosa tribes in the east of the country. After the campaign had been successfully concluded, or successfully for the British, that is, I doubt the Xhosa saw it in the same light, the 2nd Battalion joined the 1st Battalion of their regiment in Natal as part of Lord Chelmsford's planned invasion of Zululand. In the meantime, Bourne had once more been promoted, this time to Colour Sergeant of B Company, the 2nd Battalion, 24th Foot, responsible for roughly 100 men. He was just 24. the youngest colour sergeant in the British Army. Aged 24 and standing at just 5'3", Bourne swiftly earned the nickname the Kid. Bourne recalled being nervous, sensitive and afraid of his new responsibilities, but there was no need to be. A popular non-commissioned officer, he recalls becoming something like a private unpaid secretary to the men in B Company who could not read and write, as he conveyed messages from loved ones back home and wrote out the responses from his charges in South Africa. Fast forward to January 1879, and both battalions of the 24th provided the backbone for Chelmsford's ill-fated invasion of Zululand. As the 24th crossed the Buffalo River, B Company were left behind to guard the supply depot at Rorkes Drift, on the British side of the river. Bourne recalled his bitter disappointment as an infantryman to see his comrades heading off towards the battle, whilst they were stuck on guard duty. But all of that was to swiftly change. On the 22nd of January 1879, just 11 days after the invasion began, the British camp at Isandlwana was overrun by a highly disciplined Zulu attack. Despite gallant resistance and inflicting significant casualties of their own, the British couldn't hold back the huge Zulu army of 20,000 men. And the British force of 1,300 men was wiped out. Part of the Zulu army, who had been held in reserve, now headed for the supply depot at Rorkes Drift. Now, I've produced a video all about the battle, so I don't want to repeat the story here for you. So this is a real top-line summary. The old mission station at Rorkes Drift had been converted into both a supply depot and a hospital. And even with the hospital patients, there were less than 150 British soldiers garrisoned at Rorkes Drift when a force of 4,000 Zulus attacked them late on the afternoon of the 22nd of January 1879. For nearly 12 hours through that long African night, the British defenders fought a desperate battle which included many acts of bravery, not least from some of the soldiers who had been placed in the hospital to protect the patients. As the Zulus burst into the building, these soldiers dug their way through the walls, moving from room to room, whilst holding the Zulus at bay. And all the time, the roof of the hospital was on fire. Shortly after dawn on the 23rd of January, the Zulus withdrew back across the Buffalo River. Over 500 of their comrades had been killed or wounded. The British defenders had lost just 17 men killed. As I said, I've done a video all about that battle, and there's a link at the end of this video and in the descriptions below if you want to hear more about that. 11 Victoria Crosses were awarded to the defenders of Rorkes Drift. Colour Sergeant Bourne was not one of the recipients. This submission often raises a few eyebrows and indeed a few hackles too. Now, just remember that the Victoria Cross is awarded for conspicuous bravery, valour or self-sacrifice, or extreme devotion to duty. There was no doubting the role he played was a backbone to B Company, but that was effectively his job description as a colour sergeant. But just doing your job well was not in itself grounds to be awarded a Victoria Cross. Now, I think we can all have a debate about the awarding system and exactly why some people got Victoria Crosses and not others, but now is not the moment. Maybe we are all coloured by Nigel Green's brilliant performance in Zulu, and we base our opinions on the film depiction of Frank Bourne rather than the reality. It seems that actually Bourne was actually offered a Victoria Cross, or alternatively a commission. Unlike Hector MacDonald, who's featured in another one of my videos, he decided that as the 8th son of a labourer, the family exchequer was, as he recalled later on, empty. So he refused the offer of a commission in 1879. He was actually one of the 4 defenders at Rorkes Drift to be awarded Britain's second highest military medal at the time, the Distinguished Conduct Medal. And alongside that medal, interestingly, he was awarded an annuity or pension of £10 a year, which was actually the same amount that the holder of the Victoria Cross received. Colour Sergeant Frank Bourne stayed in the army after the Zulu Wars. 2 years later, the 24th changed their name to the South Wales Borderers, and they travelled to India. And it was in St Thomas Cathedral in Bombay, modern-day Mumbai, that he married Eliza Mary Fincham in 1882. Their first child, a son, Percy, was born in India the following year, and then another son, Sydney, was born in 1885. The boys were to be joined by 3 sisters over the coming years. By then, Frank Bourne was on active service, participating in the Third Anglo-Burmese War. The South Wales Borderers were part of a 9,000-strong army of British and Indian troops who were ferried up the Irrawaddy River to attack the Burmese capital. And this old flotilla of boats was made famous by Rudyard Kipling in his poem Mandalay. Now a quartermaster sergeant, Bourne followed his regiment back to Britain, and in 1890 he finally took that commission that he'd been offered 11 years before. In 1893, Lieutenant Bourne was appointed adjutant or main administrative coordinator to the commanding officer at the School of Musketry in Hythe in Kent, close to his home county of Sussex. The role of the School of Musketry was almost like a train the trainers sort of place, where you were training other NCOs to instruct common soldiers and new recruits in musket skills in the British Army. Captain Frank Bourne finally retired from the army after 35 years service in 1907. Moving to Beckenham in Kent, he became Assistant Secretary of the National Miniature or Small Bore Rifle Club. This nationwide club had been established by Field Marshal Lord Roberts after the Boer War to produce a reserve of skilled marksmen who could be called upon in times of need. And a time of need was fast approaching. In 1914, the First World War broke out. 60-year-old Frank Bourne tried to re-enlist, but he was deemed too old for active service. His skills and experience were, however, seen as such an asset that he was once more appointed as an adjutant at the School of Musketry, this time in Dublin. He was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel, and during the course of the 4-year war, Bourne was responsible for the training of something like 10,000 British and Irish marksmen. When peace was finally restored, Bourne retired for a second time, having now been awarded the Order of the British Empire, the OBE, to go with his Distinguished Conduct Medal. Frank Bourne, the last surviving defender from the Battle of Rorkes Drift, died aged 91 on the 9th of May 1945, one day after VE Day, the end of the World War II in Europe. In 1936, Bourne was interviewed for BBC Radio, and he recorded the events at Rorkes Drift 57 years beforehand. Incredibly, someone at the BBC years later binned the interview because they thought it had no historic value. Can you imagine? However, the transcript published in the weekly BBC magazine at the time, The Listener, does survive, and it's really well worth a read. In the interview, Bourne expressed surprise that the Zulus didn't simply use their assegais to slit the mealie bags that had formed the barricades and effectively collapse them, so they could almost walk, as he said, he could almost walk over them. He shared his admiration for the Zulus, and he commented that if the enemy had known how to actually use their rifles better, British casualties at Rorkes Drift would have been a heck of a lot higher. And finally, Bourne reflected on his men from B Company. And this is what he said in the interview. Now, just one word for the men who fought that night. I was moving amongst them all the time, and not for one moment did they flinch. Their courage and bravery cannot be expressed in words. For me, they were an example of my soldiering days. What a humble soldier, and yet another example of the heroes that served in the British Army in Victorian times. Colour Sergeant, later Lieutenant Colonel, Frank Bourne, OBE, DCM, Senior Non-Commissioned Officer at Rorkes Drift. Just 24 years of age, 5'3", the kid. Well, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the shots of Pershore Abbey here in Worcestershire as well. So what stories would you like to hear about from British or British military history? Drop me a line below in the comments and I'll see if I can add them to my ever-growing list. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel, or maybe even consider becoming a patron. But in the meantime, keep well, and I'll see you very soon.